morning, everybody. It's about as warm here this morning as it was cold yesterday morning when we were actually doing an internal session with the staff in Dublin City Council. I want to welcome you all, and I want to thank you all for coming and for attending what I hope you will find an interesting day, and to thank you for your interest and commitment. Some of you are ahead of the game in relation to sustainability. Some of you are probably like ourselves, have an awful lot of work to do. But the fact that you're all here means that you're all interested. I want to thank Dick Budden, John and Michael, and our own staff, Matt, Toomey, Dick Gleeson and others who are really driving this project within Dublin City Council. John mentioned about passion. I was mentioning, and I'm sorry if I'm going to be telling some of the same stories as I was telling yesterday, but 8 weeks ago almost to the day I woke up and realised I was sleeping with a granny. You see, we had our first grandchild, and I don't know about the passion thing, but anyway. But the moral of that is that when I look at my grandson now, I say to myself, will he have the opportunities that all of us have had, or at least some of those opportunities, for the next 60, 70 years? The funny side of that, though, was that one of the staff rang my wife afterwards and said, do you realise your husband is sleeping around? Because I know you, and you don't look old enough to be a granny, he said. But anyway. The financial analogy, I think, is interesting, because I think what that is saying to us, there's a message there that we can't accumulate without consequence. And the same applies in relation to the environmental sense. And if you like, that's trying to give a very simple meaning to what the issue of sustainability is about. But when it comes to definitions, I particularly like one by Seneca, who was a Roman senator who lived between 5 BC and 60 AD. He said it was about enjoying present pleasures in such a way as not to injure future ones. And the Romans were good on the pleasures. But isn't it a very simple way of trying to realise what we're trying to achieve in sustainability? But as Jerry Wardell, our director of the City of Dublin Energy Management Agency would say, it's not just a definition, it's now actually an obligation. We're working on a vision for the city of being a creative and sustainable city, and I'll talk a little bit more about the creativity issue in a moment. And we're trying to do that on the basis of still trying to maintain a vibe that's distinctly Dublin. And we're trying to drive that ahead under 6 different headings: the economic, the social, the cultural, the environmental, which we're going to talk a bit about today, the urban form and movement or transportation of people. And sustainability is relevant to each heading. But when it comes to environmental sustainability, it's probably the best example of where we can all work together as organisations on a cross-organisational basis for the benefit of Dublin City. And that's really what the Sustainable Dublin project is about for us. And I think it's also about a competitive edge for the city. Dr. Robert will talk about this in terms of some of the companies he has worked with. We'll shortly see IKEA in Dublin, but he will demonstrate what he and others working with IKEA have achieved in terms of sustainability for that company. There's a pretty serious situation at the moment. I quoted this Guardian article yesterday, which is based on a UN report, where it says the world is facing a natural resources crisis far worse than the financial crunch. Humanity is currently using up 30% more resources than is sustainable. We're going to require 2 planets if we keep going the way we are by 2030. And if everyone on the planet was to consume what we're consuming in Ireland, we'd need 5 planets. So clearly something fundamental has to change. But the trouble with statistics or with quoting things like that is you'd almost stay in bed in the morning. You'd feel that the whole project was of such magnitude that it would be difficult to motivate yourself. But really it's all about motivation at the moment, because whatever about, in my view, where I'm sitting, whatever about the rest of the world, Dublin is my focus. It's our focus. So we've got to make a difference. And as I keep saying to people, if you're finding it hard when you look at the magnitude of those things, simplify it in your own mind. The one-step campaign, small step campaign, is a very good example of that. When you bring it into your own home, when you turn down the heating by that 1 degree, whatever you do, simplify it, and then you bring it back up to the strategic issue that we have to do. Just in terms of what we're doing in Dublin City Council ourselves, We're working on higher building standards. By the 1st of January this year, our development plan will seek a building energy rating of A3, which is about a 60% improvement on where we would have been about 2 years ago. And as someone who bought a house in Dublin 4 years ago, when I came up to live here, I realised the necessity of that, because a lot of problems with the houses that were built. We've built 40% of our total housing stock since 1996, and there are a lot of problems with it in terms of the building standards. We're doing a very interesting low energy development in York Street, one of our own housing developments. It's actually up for a Local Government Excellence Award tonight, using solar panels and so on to make sure it's as sustainable as possible. We're working on the district heating project, again assuming that the incineration facility, waste to energy facility is granted. It's making use of the energy created there. Again, hydroelectricity works in Vartry, which is actually making that completely sustainable from an electricity point of view. We have a very interesting project which will open next March, which is the new amenity at Father Collins Park in the north of part of the city. And every conceivable way of making that as sustainable as possible, including wind turbines, have been put in place as an example, again, of our commitment to sustainability. And again, like many companies, we're working on this whole issue of workplace travel. And I got out of the car myself 1.5 years ago, so I'm able to preach what I practice now, at least, walking and taking the bus. And actually, life is a lot simpler when you try to do things like that, if it's available to you. And some other initiatives, we've obviously we had our climate change conference a few weeks ago. CODEMA now, which is the City of Dublin Energy Agency, is working with the 4 local authorities as we try to pool our resources in terms of energy efficiency. We launched our biodiversity plan, doing a lot of work in terms of rehabilitating our water infrastructure, preventing leakage and so on. And again, like many companies, doing recycling and work. And again, something like the apartment guidelines, which we adopted in the last 12 months, is a very interesting project, because it's about trying to make the city itself more attractive and sustainable for people and get over this issue of apartment guidelines. And our fire service, indeed, is also involved in some innovative projects to improve sustainability in the stations, and also about how we use water in terms of the fire service. So how do we move forward together? I suppose one of the things that is most important is how we try to get this agreement on a basic framework about sustainability. I mean, the projects I've mentioned should become the rule rather than just initiatives. And we need to inform all of our work to try and make that happen. So how do we get this basic framework for sustainability and then slowly evolve the way we live to be more sustainable? What we're presenting to you today is just one approach in that regard, and this will be, Dr. Robert will really highlight this. It's based around this framework for strategic sustainable development. And other companies are doing other things, and we'd like to hear about that today. But I suppose ultimately it's to try and find an overall framework that we're all working together, in our case, in relation to Dublin. A simple thing that we've decided to do, again, trying to make it more real for everybody in the organisation, is we have what's called a performance management development system, which involves all supervisors having team meetings and also having individual conversations with their staff. So sustainability is one of the issues which has got to be part of those plans for the coming year and beyond. So the need for change is all around, whether it's environmental, financial, transportation. And one of the big challenges is to try and get people to understand what this means for them and why it is required. And there's a whole change of mindset involved here. And again, Carol will talk a bit about how he got mindset changed in local authorities as well as in private companies. So I'd pose the question, are we reaching a milestone in our collective understanding where we suddenly realise almost simultaneously that the way we have designed the process of living is inadequate or suddenly not fit for purpose? I mentioned about the creativity aspect. We are also working on an initiative with the universities and with business in the city on what's called Creative Dublin. And one of the objectives there is to focus on this whole issue of design thinking in all spheres of life. You know, what way do we teach our children in relation to the design of the world around us, or do we concentrate on memory? What way do we use design in terms of making it a competitive edge for the city? And that's part of what we're doing here with the Sustainable Dublin agenda. We're trying to get people to think about the design of processes. I think we'd all accept at this stage that business as usual won't work, and we can't simply look at the past for the things we have to do in the future. And it has been pointed out that certainly for local authorities, we can't assume that the way we've always done things is the way to do things in the future. And I don't think business can either. But you can all help, and we want to try and find ways of mobilising all of the people in the city to make a difference, because there's a huge amount of creativity, a huge amount of knowledge among our people to try and make that difference. And I'm sure if I was to ask anybody here, you could all envisage the kind of society you would like to maintain into the future and the characteristics of such a place. But we can't predict the future, and certainly, 3 months ago, who could have predicted the world we'd have today? I suppose Barack Obama would say, who would have predicted 18 months ago that he would be President of the United States? If you went back to live in Einstein's time, he'd be kind of flabbergasted with the world and what we've done in the intervening period. The internet wasn't even born in 1996. So you see what happens in terms of what can change so quickly. So I suppose we need to start by using an approach which, you kind of lift your head above and put our daily work in context. I used, John mentioned about the Kilkenny analogy, and I have to say, promoting Kilkenny as a concept is difficult for a Tipperary person. But they've won 3 All-Irelands. When you watch them play, their head is up, they're aware of what's around them, and they make life look simple. But it's probably based on 4 steps. It's based on awareness, it's based on training, it's based on motivation and spirit, and it's certainly based on application. And that's very like the 4 steps we talk about in the natural steps. So you can use that in any kind of a sporting analogy. I'm tempted to mention about a text I got recently when I'm talking about hurling, about where the Hungarian loan from the International Monetary Fund has actually been held up because the Cork hurlers don't agree. So I'll explain to Anne-Marie and to Carol what that means afterwards. But anyway, I couldn't resist that, being a Tipperary man either. So really what we're trying to do is inform our actions and policies so that we begin to move step by step towards that ultimate goal. So it's about making a difference, and it's about it being our obligation. I suppose one of the major documents where we try to put this into practice in terms of a vision is our city development plan. And that's a very important document that sets out our collective intent for a future Dublin. And sustainability, because it's now enshrined in the legislation, has to be at the core of our thinking. And we're going to have to be bold in our thinking and brave in our approach. And this is very much about working at the strategic level. In terms of participation, well, as I said to you earlier, we want to capitalise on the ideas that are out there amongst our people, including the audience here today. And Sustainable Dublin is about a much more long-term vision. You can go 20, 30, 40 years ahead. And all of the community have a role in creating the future city, because we can talk all we like here in this room today. But if people don't make change in their living habits, in their working habits, in their commuting habits, well, then we haven't been successful in what we're trying to achieve. But we have to determine how far the next and the subsequent city development plans will take us in moving towards that vision. And the consultation we begin to do will be very important in that regard. So we have to agree on what sustainability actually means for us. And Carl will share his understanding of that with us today. We have to have this common understanding across the city which will allow us to work more effectively. And we need the creative brains, the influential people, and the committed individuals working together so as to make a difference. People today are very worried about things like the correction in the financial markets. But on the other hand, doesn't it present us with an opportunity to make the next upturn in the cycle more sustainable? And from my perspective, I want Dublin City Council to become the most sustainable local authority possible, and that the Dublin region would be the envy of the world in this regard. Because I can tell you, when it comes to quality of life and these issues, that's what investors are looking at now, because that's what their workers, they're the places their workers wish to go. And I think the words of Dr. Robert will be very interesting and helpful in charting a possible way forward. I know the challenges are daunting, but I honestly believe we can make a difference. And I suppose, just by way of conclusion, every time I look at my grandson, I'm reminded why I personally have to make a difference. Thank you very much.